and welcome to Chatterbox, the brand new podcast where anything could happen. Before we get into discussing the future of the podcast and why you cannot see a visual other than that waveform technique, line wavy thing, and the logo to the podcast, well, it's an easy story. So, I think quite a good few years ago, when I was still in high school, now in my final year of college, Um, I wanted to create my own radio station. I've been wanting to do this for years because my brother did my primary school's radio, and then it got shut down, and none of the evidence of the radio station still exists online, which is a little bit gutting. Anyway, that's a separate thing altogether. So I always wanted to make my own radio station, and I used to do this thing called Music Tech Club, which was a club where you did music related things. And it was fun. And so I thought I could create a radio station. I watched videos on how to create radio stations, and I found out you could do it through SoundCloud. At that time, I didn't know it was called a podcast, because I didn't know much about podcasts in the medium, and I didn't know anything about podcasts full stop, because I wasn't a connoisseur in the entertainment industry. I was still going to find out what the YouTube thing was, because I hadn't actually discovered YouTube not that long ago, because I was born the year before YouTube existed. Anyway, so what happened was I created this thing called Radio Epic. I got someone that I had only recently met who was helping me learn the craft of media. Not as in the editing craft, because I knew that for quite some time. It's just like how to use the software that I wanted to use, like After Effects, Animate, and Premiere, whichever one's the UK wording for it. So I created this thing called Radio Epic. We got one radio show out of it that was music based. None of the music really was what I listened to, but it was what other people listened to, because that's what I was trying to get out of it. So we did one episode of that, and then I changed it, keeping it to Radio Epic, but then got it to be this sort of podcast. So I did Doctor Who discussions, still being called Radio Epic. It was called Doctor Who discussion. Then I did multiple other podcasts on the same podcast feed, and then I did my own audio drama that was really rubbish, but I think I might bring back, in a sense of, I might turn it into an actual audio drama and write it properly. I think it's called The Adventures of Oliver Time or something. I'm not too sure. And it's still up there to listen to. So I did all this thing, and then a few years later, I changed the name to Doctor Discussions, creating a logo that was really awful. But by this point, I think I made TV Critic and other podcasts. And so I created that, and then there's a thing on BBC Sounds called Doctor Redacted, which is an audio drama series where there's these people that create a podcast called the Blue Box Files, try and find out who the Doctor is, but they only one person remembers who the Doctor is, and everyone's been removed and whatever, and all this jazz, which is fantastic, created by Ella Watts. Anyway, so it goes on, and I watched this live stream, and I said, in the live chat thing, or whatever it's called, I said, oh, that'd be a really good name for a podcast. And it was. So I changed the name of my podcast to it, got a file, a JPEG, or a cartoon image of a file, got a blue background, got the TARDIS, and called it the Blue Box Files. And the logo, actually, is one of my proudest things I've ever designed in graphic design-wise. I'm very proud of that. I got to interview Ella Watts and told her all about it, and she thought it was she was really flattered that I had took inspiration from that. Anyway, so then I created 16 YouTube channels, and now I have 16 YouTube channels, and I keep creating podcast after podcast after podcast, because it's not a new channel it's a new type of content on a certain channel. I created a podcast called I Have an Idea. And I Have an Idea, I Have an Idea, was a podcast all about the ideas that were in my head, and each episode was going to be a new podcast to celebrate that idea. And so I did it. I created the podcast, and I created the first episode. Because I'd listened to a podcast called Tommy Tin and Investigates, which is the Irish comedian Tommy Tin in his shed talking to himself about something he's been investigating that week. Which is a fantastic idea for a podcast. So I thought, I want to do a solo podcast where there's no agenda and I can just ramble. Turns out, I'm not very good at rambling or just wittering on without prior knowledge of what I want to witter on about. So the podcast, it was going to be called Rambling with Tom. The intro to I Have an Idea got copyrighted, so did the intro to Rambling with Tom. A few months later, it was as of last week actually, because today, as of recording this, is the 27th of April, 2023. I listened to the Rob Beckett and Josh Widdicombe Parenting Hell audiobook, which is based on their sensational podcast Parenting Hell. Now, the episode, it was going on, and I thought to myself, I really want a popular podcast like that. So the reason why I want my podcast to be popular, the ones that I have guests on, is because then I actually get people want to come on who I want to interview anyway. So it saves me going, can I interview you? Here it is, can I interview you? Can I interview you? They're like, oh, can I come on? Can I come on? It's all the ones I want to interview. So Joking Apart is supposed to be that, but it's slowly building up its audience numbers of who's on it guest-wise to know whether or not they'll recommend it to their friend, who recommend it to their friend, who will then say, yes, I do want to come on to your podcast. So hopefully that's the case. Anyway, so it goes on, and I don't think about this. And so with that idea of wanting to do it, I create this Chatterbox. Because I can talk about whatever nonsense I want to, and keep it all relevant all at the same time. And if you hear any clicking in the background, I'm sorry. I was just opening up a file on my computer so I can get ready to edit another video I filmed before this on the main channel, which is Tom Mason. Anyway, back to it. So I thought, I'll create this podcast. Everything was hunky-dory. It was going to be a topical podcast where each week, each episode, I would have a topic I would talk about, and it would go from there. And then I was really excited about this idea, I had Monday off because it was May Day, so I thought, oh, I'm going to start this podcast. I'm so excited. And then I was watching an episode of Realistica with Jude Herring's on Square Theatre podcast, the new ones, because if you get Acast Plus, you can watch him. And Chris McCausland, who is a British blind comedian, he had a podcast called Chris McCausland, That Blind Comedian, which is a fantastic title for a podcast. So, and I listened to the first episode. It was him rambling about his week. It cut to audio recordings of his stand-up, and it was him just whispering to himself, and it was utter nonsense. It was hilarious, it's funny, and I'm enjoying listening to it currently. And that gave me an idea. Bingo! Chatterbox is going to be a rambling podcast where sometimes I have a topic, sometimes I don't. Sometimes there'll be random recordings of ideas I've had throughout the day, and none of it really links to the main topic of the episode, but it'll just be slotted in like Chris McCausland did. So that's what I'm going to do. This podcast, Chatterbox, is going to be a random selection of things. Every episode will be completely different. Some episodes, I'll be at my desk. You'll be able to see my lovely face if you're watching it on YouTube and if you're watching it on Spotify. Some episodes will be like this, where you've got the logo and an audio waveform, and you just hear my voice. So each episode will be completely different to the next. There you go. That is the introduction to Chatterbox intro. Music coming in the very first episode. Oh well, in an episode soon. Hopefully episode 1 might be out on Monday because it's May Day, which in the UK means that it's bank holiday. on the 1st of May, which means all the banks are shut down, I think. That's what May Day is. So, thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for listening. I'll see you next time. Come along with this journey through Tom improving podcasts, one at a time.